has, we tend to cut ourselves off from that. But when it comes to literature's role in impacting our conservation, I think it's very difficult because less and less people are reading these days. And so I don't know how great the role of literature is into, creating awareness of this. We would go back and read, say, the English Romantic poets or something like that, or
I would just want to add to your point that you said that people are reading less, but I think the forms of reading have changed. Like maybe we are reading more on like online platforms, or we are reading more through OTT platforms. I think the way we consume literature has changed.
I don't know. Well, I'm just speaking from my own experience as a professor. I'm always wanting to get my students to read, and they're saying, "Have you done your homework?" And no. But yes, I think that's a very good point. But in terms of, I know, say again, going back to Australia, there is an organization called Red Room Poetry based in Sydney, and they run various programs, again, probably for children and young adults, not so much high school students. But I think that is a very good point. And they run programs like, I think it's called New Shoots, where they get participants to write about nature, they collaborate with Botanical Gardens of Sydney and so on, so that the young writers are actually responding to nature very early, and it is around issues like conservation of nature. So I think probably like a social literary programs like that are very, very more impactful than simply putting a book out there and expecting only those interested in reading to come to it. It's kind of like preaching to the converted, if you like.
So even the writers will have to put in more efforts.
I think we have to find ways of responding to the zeitgeist. Handmaid's Tale was an amazingly successful series, wasn't it? So I think, like literary adaptations and so on could be a very good way of doing that.
Yeah, yes, please.
And I sadly agree with you, Catherine. The younger generation tend to read less and less. We live in a society where mostly everything has to be visual. And when it comes to something as crucial as preserving our natural heritage, I tend to believe that other forms of art besides literature are way more impactful. I'm just thinking about Banksy, for example.
Yeah. And the wall art.
And his Monet's show me the money, show me the money. That is the pun, and it's based on the water lilies by Claude Monet. But then you see a traffic cone and a shopping cart, and it's just a reflection on how we're handling nature and the outcome of this insane consumer society we live in. And having used that with my students when I was a teacher, there was no quote I could have given from any author that would have made 10% of the impact this work by Banksy had on them. It's pretty sad, but that's the reality of the world we live in. And street art, being out of the museum, out of anything academic, resonating with the passerby, the man or the woman on the street, and most importantly, being accessible on social media. Literature and social media are not as impactful of any form of visual art. So that's sad, but that's a reality when we're talking about raising awareness and the importance of preserving our natural heritage.
You rightly talked about like importance of wall art, and I think the only wall art we see in Ahmedabad in Gujarat is symbols of political parties. That's all we are getting.
There's a lament that all teachers have, including me, that students are not reading anymore, right? And then how do you get them to talk about nature and where humans come into play in this? But then I believe that we are consuming literature in a different form. Just to give you two examples where where humans and nature have interacted with: Frankenstein, Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, and Michael Crichton's Jurassic Park. These two, these two works of literature are talking about man playing God, or with that abstraction in mind, right? It does give us an impact of what happens when you mess around with the natural order of things and what it can lead to. Now, these two books, for those who are literature lovers, Frankenstein still remains the best horror genre to go to. But for the younger generation, probably they have seen a knockoff version of that book in the form of a movie, but it gets them to talk about what is the role of man in nature. And the same thing happens with Jurassic Park also. I mean, if you look at it, what we are doing is we are messing around with gene splicing and all. We are messing around with the natural order of things. And students do tend to see that, just even for the sake of watching it. But it's a good way to start the conversation on where do we want, what role do we want us to play in the future with this. So yes, we are consuming in a different way. We are consuming from different sources, but it, I think, aligns with what we are talking about here. Where do we want the discussion to go?
Here I would also want to add that literature is so powerful that instead of just preserving our cultural heritage, literature can create heritage. To just give an example, that's something like Harry Potter. Harry Potter is a fictional character, but now we have Harry Potter's traditional railway station built in Scotland. Romeo and Juliet, it's a fictional character, but now in Europe, we have places where you can actually write a letter to Juliet. Even sitting in India, I can post a letter to Juliet. So, I mean, it's just interesting that how powerful literature is, that an author sitting alone, maybe somewhere in library, writing a character, and now people are following it, and there are real, actual places, you know, which are built based on that literature. Yeah. Coming to the next question, I would really want to know that, as you rightly said, that human beings are a small subset of nature. And talking of my personal understanding of human beings, I have understood human beings through the literature of Ayn Rand, especially through Fountainhead. I have understood the resilience of human beings, the power of human beings, and how a small, timid human being can be so powerful in adverse circumstances. Or I have understood literature through Sapiens. So I would want to know from each of you that what's that one piece of literature that has really impacted you? And I think this will also help audience to just maybe pick up another interesting book or consume a little bit of literature which is really, really worth it. Yeah, anything that, you know, has really impacted you as a person. Again, not a
I think the difficulty is narrowing it down to one only.
Yeah, just one piece of literature.
Does it have to do with nature? Because I would say, I mean, I am a writer, but I don't necessarily, I write a lot of, I would say, urban pieces more than anything. Not to say that urban ecology isn't something on theme, but...
keeping the ground open, I mean, you can choose anyone, yeah.
I think I was talking to a friend of mine. I ordered him a book by a writer who had a very big impact on me, and her name was Rosamund Lehman, and she was a writer in 1920s, English writer, who, when her first novel came out when she was in her 20s, very young, it was reviewed as the kind of novel that Keats would have written. And what I find, I read about her work before I actually read her work. I wasn't able to access it. This was back in the day before Amazon and so on, when I was at university. So I went to the Bar Smith Library at the University of Adelaide and immediately started reading her work. And I think now, you know, about 20 years later, still has an impact on my writing, and I still refer to her books because, I mean, she was never as popular as, say, Virginia Woolf, who was writing at the time, and of course was very groundbreaking and experimental in her style.
So popular.
Yeah, and but Rosamund Lehman was, she was a humanist. Like the way that she could write about emotional life was incredible, and still very contemporary. And I wish she were read more. But she's had, I mean, I'm predominantly known as a poet, but I do write short fiction as well.
But how has it impacted you as a person?
Yeah, I guess I'm getting to that. yes, rather than just telling you about how has it impacted me, I think it's made me more aware. I mean, as a poet, I think, I'm sure a lot of people in the audience write poetry. You would say that a poem is a response to an emotional event. It's about observation and self-observation, and not only that, but about communion with an unknown reader. You want for someone to, if not see what you are, or perceive what you are writing, or interpret the way you are writing it, but certainly feel something when they read your words. Anything. It could be disgust even, or ridicule, as well as, yes, I understand what that person, the empathy, I understand what that person was feeling, and I know I'm kind of running on here, sorry. So yes, so Rosamund Lehman, even though she didn't write poetry, I think she made me aware of the vast ocean of feelings to be somehow captured within my own creative practice.
I think literature can make you empathetic, and I think that's the real power of.
Yes, but I'm full of admiration for people who can do it as precisely and beautifully as she was writing.
Thank you. Yeah. Yes, please.
Well, I tried very, very hard to name a French author. Because the first that came to mind were either English or American. But then when I found the author, the French author, I think even though if it's not the first that came to mind, he's the one that has had the strongest personal impact on me. And that would be the poet I mentioned before, Charles Baudelaire, who wrote The Flowers of Evil. And it's funny that I would pick a poet, because I don't read poetry, to be honest. But it's The Flowers of Evil have always traveled around with me. I always carry a copy with me. I've been around the world, and I always have a copy of The Flowers of Evil with me. And the reason why I picked it, it's pretty similar to what you said. It's about the human feelings. It's things that you're aware of, but you don't know how to express. And the poet has that way with words, and uses the violence of language to express those feelings that you have, but you cannot put words on it. And when it comes to Charles Baudelaire, it's also about the feast of the senses. And I realized this is how I live my life. I try to find beauty wherever I can, in nature, in humans as well, in everything that surrounds me, and it has to be a feast of the senses. And this very poet, that I really encourage you to read, if you've not done so, has this very peculiar way of having the sense of smell and the eyesight and the taste. It's like you can taste, see, hear everything at once, and it's just magical.
Yeah, it's beautiful how everything just sums up to feelings and being a better human being. Yeah. Anyone else?
So for me, the book that would have spoken to me at a different level was Galapagos by Von Goethe, because it has a line saying that the greatest evil of all time, the greatest villain of all time is the human brain. Because that book talks about how human beings have destroyed the earth, and then a new generation of semi-seal-like creatures are populating. So again, this part of me, which I come back to again, that not taking care of nature kind of scares me. I think it is deep-rooted in that particular book, which really moved me to think about. And this is not a recent book. It's not a recent one. It's an old book which has stood the test of time. So that really spoke to me.
Interesting. It's just beautiful how few lines of a book or a paragraph of a book can really inspire you. To just give you a personal example, for me, it's just about like two roads diverge in the wood, and I took the one less traveled, and that made all the difference. I think I go back to these lines time and again, because it becomes like a guiding light in my life. And I think it's for all of us that literature has the power, it has the influence to guide you. And on this note, I'll keep this forum open for people. If you have any questions, we are here to talk about world literature. People who are representing world literature are here. If you have any questions, feel free to ask.
or doomsday. But what about literature using this theme in the background? I mean, you know, simply a description of the hills of a particular place. I've recently been reading a lot of books where Wales is the background, or the Cotswolds are the background. And simply reading about that in the background makes one feel that this is a beautiful place. It should be kept the way it is. It should not be damaged. So what is your take on this direct versus indirect?
For the indirect one, ma'am, I'd be able to answer that. Again, going back to ancient literature, Tamil literature per se, it would always categorize, if there was an interaction between lovers, it would always categorize it in 4 landscapes. So you would have the mountains in this kind of literature where the clandestine meetings between lovers would happen. It gives them hooks and corners to hide in. If their separation was for a very long period, the background would always be the sea. Because the vastness does resonate with that. If they had challenges in meeting, but it was very short period for this, generally it would be either a bucolic pasture or probably a forest where this encounter would happen. And you would see that the same thing happens in the Ramayana also. The 14 years of Vanvas also happens in the forest because it has this. And if they had to show jealousy, it would always be the scorching earth. The background would always be there. And that is something that happens even recently. So whatever Perumal is writing right now has the same kind of thing. It's just that nature works in the background and it just helps set the tone for it. And probably that was an indirect way of influencing us to start thinking on those lines, to associate this. The same thing I've seen in one of the books by, it's called Chemmin. It's a Malayalam book. It's written by Thagadi Shivashankar Pillai. The setting is the sea, because the title means shrimp, and it talks about forlorn lovers who are unable to meet each other. And again, the sea talks about that. So I think very subtly these writers have always brought it in for people to understand. And I think probably that was an indirect way of showing it.
To just add to what you said, that you said that many a times nature is just in the backdrop, not as the central theme. But I would want to say that what is nature? I think it's not just about mountains and sun. And someone has rightly said that we, and whatever our extension is, like this table or chair or this stage, everything is nature. If you can't find God, or if you can't find nature, say on your computer or on this chair, then I don't think we can find nature on mountains, or we can find nature on the top of a mountain. So I think it really depends on what our idea of nature is.
Thank you. I have a question to Mr. Emmanuel. Yeah. First of all, congratulations. Author from your country has got Nobel for Literature a few days back. I believe it was declared yesterday or day before yesterday. And you have studied American literature. A very generic question. What is the basic difference between American literature and the French literature?
Straightforwardness, I would say. That's a trick question. Wow, what am I going to say? French literature is well, American literature is a literature of people from the New World. So it's a more recent civilization. It would be the same thing as asking what is the difference between British English and American English. It's this straightforwardness, this sense of efficiency, you know. When you think about French literature, you think about fancy words, fancy settings, fancy stories. You can think about les liaisons dangereuses, dangerous liaisons, you know, a very sophisticated intellectual literature. American literature would be the literature of the people, you know, and not tackling less interesting or less deep topics, but just in somehow a more universal and effective way. And I'm feeling sorry for saying that because I'm supposed to promote French literature. Yeah, French literature is all about beauty. Not always about being efficient in reaching as many people as possible. Things are changing with contemporary literature. Really, the Nobel Prize of Literature, which I'm proud to say is French, is the exact opposite of what I've just described in terms of talking to the people and to everyone. So yeah, that's how I would answer that question.
Thank you.
Thank you. I guess this is a wonderful session, but we are really running a little short of time. I know you all have so many questions, but these people are really available and they'll be happy to answer your questions off the stage. Am I right, sir? I'm sorry. Yeah.
mean that the environment and the natural heritage outside of cities isn't a character in urban literature still. There are still moments where characters, there's 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 still moments where characters outside of 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 there's still moments where character outside of there's still moments where character outside of there's still moments where characters outside of there's still moments where character outside of there's still moments where characters there's still moments where characters there's still moments where character there's still moments where character